The mysterious bombing on Wall Street. 95 years ago. 95 years after the explosion of a horse-drawn wagon filled with dynamite on Wall Street, let us look back at one of the most mysterious terrorist attacks in American history. If Lower Manhattan's financial district was the heart of American capitalism in the 1922nd, then the southeast corner of Wall Street and Broad Street was its most important crossroads. Here stood the headquarters of J.P. Morgan and Company, the financial giant that had risen after World War I as the most influential banking institution in the world. Across the street were the U.S. Treasury and the Assay Office, while at the end of the street stood the bustling New York Stock Exchange. The weather forecast for the 16th of September, 1920, predicted rain. Yet when the bells of Trinity Church nearby tolled at noon, the corner had already returned to its usual rhythm. Bank clerks and stockbrokers gathered in front of buildings, the streets crowded with wagons and messengers. Few noticed the shabby horse-drawn wagon parked in front of the Assay Office, nor the driver who had just dropped the reins and disappeared into the crowd. The church bells were still echoing at 12:01 when a 100-pound explosive hidden inside the wagon detonated with a deafening roar. It was the most terrible sound I have ever heard in my life, recalled Andrew Dunn, an employee of J.P. Morgan. It was enough to make you faint. The blast was so strong that it derailed a streetcar a block away, hurling debris up to the 34th floor of the nearby Equitable Building. The remains of the doomed horse were scattered hundreds of yards from the site. Stockbroker Joseph P. Kennedy, father of the future, President John F. Kennedy, was knocked off his feet by the shock, along with many others. Those who stood closer to the wagon were incinerated in flames or torn apart by hundreds of pounds of shrapnel, most likely heavy iron bars cruelly packed into the bomb to maximize its lethality. I saw the explosion, a column of smoke rising into the sky, and then people falling all around me, some of them with their clothes on fire. One witness later told the New York Sunday, "What followed was a rain of shattered glass from windows, drenching the streets and nearby offices. Inside the Morgan building, fragments ripped through violently. One shard crushed the skull of 4-year-old office worker William Joyce as he sat at his desk. For many World War I veterans present, the scene of devastation evoked uncanny memories of the battlefield. Wall Street had turned into a no-man's land with blood spattered, glass strewn, and charred corpses everywhere. The air was thick with smoke and soot, and severed limbs lay scattered across the ground. Right in front of the steps leading into the Morgan Bank was the body of a man hideously torn apart, wrote reporter George Weston, who survived by pressing himself into a doorway. Other bodies, most silent in death, lay nearby. As I stared in horror at the scene, one of these forms, half naked and burned, suddenly began to rise. It struggled, then collapsed and slid into the gutter. Trading at the stock exchange came to a halt, and more than 2,000 New York City police officers along with Red Cross nurses rushed to Wall Street to search through the ruins. The initial blast killed 30 men and women. 8 more later died from their injuries, and hundreds were wounded, many burned or struck by flying glass and shrapnel. This remained the deadliest act of terrorism on American soil until the Oklahoma City bombing 75 years later. Yet from the beginning, investigators struggled to determine who was responsible or why. The clear target was the Morgan Bank, accused by critics of profiting from the horrors of the war. But most of the bomb's victims were ordinary stenographers and clerks, not wealthy financiers. J.P. Morgan Jr., himself was thousands of miles away in Europe when the dynamite exploded. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch wrote, "There was no objective other than terrorism itself. The bomb was not aimed at any particular person or property. It struck the public, anyone who happened to be nearby, and any property within reach." Amid the continuing First Red Scare, suspicion quickly fell upon anti-capitalist communists and anarchists groups, blamed for dozens of bombings since the 19th century. The suspicion only deepened on the 17th of September, when postal workers discovered a stack of leaflets dropped into mailboxes in the financial district just minutes before the explosion. "Remember," they read, "we will tolerate no longer. Free the political prisoners, or it will be sure death for all of you. American anarchist fighters." These leaflets bore an uncanny resemblance to circulars distributed during a previous terror campaign in June 1919, when bombs exploded in several U.S. cities. At that time, police attributed the plot to the Gallianists, an Italian anarchist group led by fiery orator and explosives expert Luigi Galliani. Though Galliani had been deported a year earlier, the Wall Street bomb's use of heavy iron as shrapnel closely matched the infernal machines he and his followers had built. Unfortunately for authorities, the anonymous leaflets were the closest anyone ever came to claiming responsibility. Police and agents of the Bureau of Investigation, later the FBI, spent more than 3 years trying to crack the case and identify the wagon driver, but leads connected to the Gallianists and to Unionists, American communists, and even Vladimir Lenin ran cold. One bizarre dead end involved Edward Fisher, a talented yet mentally unstable tennis player who had gone about warning people to stay away from Wall Street before the blast. When investigators learned that Fisher had issued similar warnings in the past, each of which he claimed came through God and the air, they dismissed him as a suspect and committed him to a mental hospital. The final official investigation of the Wall Street bombing came in 1944, when the FBI reopened the decades-old case and concluded the blast was most likely the work of anarchists or Italian terrorists. Later, investigators pointed to Mario Buda, an associate of the notorious anarchists Sacco and Vanzetti, as the most likely culprit. He was believed to have staged the Wall Street attack in revenge for the 11th of September, 1920, indictment for murder in a botched robbery. Yet Buda fled to Italy immediately after the bombing and remained there until his death, never charged with the crime. Wall Street reopened just 1 day after the deadly blast, determined, as the New York Sun put it, to show the world that business would continue as usual despite the bomb. Office clerks, their wounds bandaged, returned to their desks. Every trace of the explosion was covered or swept away, including much evidence that might have aided police investigations. That afternoon, thousands of New Yorkers gathered at the disaster site, singing "America the Beautiful" and the national anthem together. Faintly behind them loomed the Morgan Building, its marble facade pockmarked with fist-sized craters from the shrapnel. Those scars remain visible to this day, silent monuments to an unsolved crime that claimed 38 lives.